Hello, 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 hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a test. Is anybody sitting next to an empty chair? Will you raise your hand? There are empty chairs. Is there any way you could scoot one way or the other to have two? There's two empty chairs together. Yes. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Kelly Writer's House in our garden where it's not going to rain. That's our great hope. If it does rain, this row...
It's not going to rain.
It's not going to rain. It's not going to rain. However, when it rained yesterday, it did leak a little bit along this line, so nobody will be offended if you get up. Just warning you. And we can figure out how to navigate chairs again rather than trying to relocate inside. This tent does do pretty well in the rain, except for this one little line here. Okay, so we're happy to host a version of this event every year. It's a media careers panel co-hosted by the Daily Pennsylvanian, our Povich Journalism Fund, and I have to say the very awesome alumni who run the Nora Magid Journalism Prize and also who have won the Nora Magid Journalism Prize. The point of this program is to connect undergraduates, but also a community of people connected to Writers House with Penn alumni, to give all of us a sense of the field, hopefully a hopeful sense of the field, also a realistic sense of the field, to provide really explicitly a forum for your questions, so there will be time for you to ask some questions. But at its core, this program, it's about mentorship. Which was the hallmark of Nora Magid, who we'll hear a little bit more about, I think. And it continues to be her legacy through her students, who are now journalists, teachers, mentors, people continuing the work that she inspired. So I want to really start off this program by introducing and thanking Stephen Fried in particular, who's sitting here, for putting in his all every year, not just to this program, but for this concept of mentorship, which is deeply embedded in his personal practice as a writer in all kinds of ways. And if you're going to be around Penn for homecoming, we'll hear about that at our homecoming program. We'll be celebrating Stephen's newest book, which is called Rush, Revolution, Madness, and Benjamin Rush, the visionary doctor who became a founding father. Which is a fascinating book for its history, for sure, but also for the way Stephen involved Penn students in the work of producing the book. It's pretty extraordinary. So Stephen's going to introduce this panel, but I want to start off by giving a big round of applause for Stephen himself. Thank you all for coming. There will be food afterwards, so if you have continuing questions, come inside where we'll have food.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. So I want to first tell you a little bit about the Nora Magid Mentorship Prize, which all three of these women have won. And part of the reason we do this event every year, but this is a special version of the event, because as this year was unfolding, the biggest prizes in newspapers and newspapers are the Pulitzer Prizes and magazines are the National Magazine Awards. And we've been giving the Nora Magid Mentorship Prize for enough time now that we wondered when would the people who have won the prize start winning all the big prizes in our field. And amazingly enough, these three won all the prizes this year. So as it was unfolding, we said, wouldn't it be great if we could get both of our Pulitzer Prize winners and our National Magazine Award winner together in the same place? So the Writers House has been working furiously on this to make sure that logistically everybody could be here. And Jill had to come from California. So these people aren't that far out of Penn. They were sitting here not that long ago. So every year we talk about that you could work in different publications. You could work in nonfiction media if it's something that you want. So this year we're also saying, if everything lines up right, maybe you'll be a Pulitzer Prize winner too. So before I introduce these guys, I want to tell you a tiny bit about the Nora Magid Mentorship Prize. Nora Magid was the first serious nonfiction teacher here at Penn, back when no one thought nonfiction writing was very interesting and no one could have a career in it. She and her students were very much the people who've pushed for the Writers House Project to include nonfiction when it was more of a poetry and fiction place. And I'm happy to say that Penn, I think, is now known nationally the way it should be, as a place that has amazing fiction, has amazing poetry, and has amazing nonfiction writers and nonfiction media producers of all different mediums. And that's because of the way the school has embraced this. The journalism minor, do you guys know there is a journalism? Who here knows there's a journalism minor? Okay, so not everybody. So there is a journalism minor in the English department, which was developed for people who are interested in developing their nonfiction writing. And we want to make sure that people know about that. The Nora Magid Prize is given every year. It's only for seniors. We pick who we think that the strongest senior nonfiction writer is, but we also pick finalists. We mentor the winner. We mentor the finalists, and the winner gets $3,000. And I will say that while we do mentor the winner, one of the things that I'm most proud of is one of our finalists 2 years ago, David Morrell, is now the fact checker at Philadelphia Magazine through Mentorship for the prize. So the prize is for the winners and for the finalists. So we're not going to hand things out this year because I thought they might all blow away. This is the website on CPCW for all the Nora Prize stuff, and I'll hold it up, but if you can't see it, just Google CPCW, which is the program that you're all here with, Center for Programs in Contemporary Writing, plus Nora, and the page will come up with all the information about the prize and the winner and how you apply. It's for seniors. If you're underclassmen, dream about winning it in other years and do good work that would lead to that. Okay, so what we usually do in the Careers in Media panel is have people talk about how they got to where they were with special mindfulness of how life has changed since they graduated, because it can be a lot different even a couple years later. And I will say that when we started doing these, everybody thought media was dead and political reporting was really dead. So I think that it turned, and I would always say to people, no, it ebbs and flows, it'll come back, and thank Donald Trump, now I'm right. So I just want to introduce the panel, some of whom you probably already know because Ashley's on TV all the time. And they're going to do two things. Each of them is going to walk through their career path from Penn, and then we're going to have them talk about the work that they did that, in Ashley and Jill's case, won Pulitzer Prizes this year. In Jessica's case, won the National Magazine Award. So I will read the bios now, and then we will go down. So right to my immediate left is Ashley Parker. She is a White House reporter for the Washington Post. She was part of the Post team that won the 2018 Pulitzer for national reporting for their look at Russian interference in the 2016 election. She was also part of the Post team that won the 2018 George Polk Award for reporting on the same topic. Previously, she worked at the Times for 11 years, where she covered politics, Mitt Romney in 2012, Jeb Bush and Donald Trump in 2016, and Congress, as well as other things. She started at the paper as Maureen Dowd's research assistant. She's also written for the New York Times Sunday Magazine, Glamour, HuffPost, Washingtonian, New York Sun, Philadelphia Weekly. It's nice to have it on there.
It was like my first professional cover story.
It barely exists anymore, sadly. And Chicago Magazine, and she is an MSNBC political analyst. She graduated from Penn in 2005, so she was the second winner of the Nora Prize with a double major in English, creative writing, and communications. Next to her is Jill Castellano, the youngest of this group, who is from the class of 16. She's an investigative reporter and data analyst for iNewsSource, which she will explain to us, which is a new way of gathering information. Castellano graduated from Penn with degrees in psychology and criminology. She was editor-in-chief of Daily Pennsylvanian. She interned at New York Daily News, Forbes, and Philly Inquirer. She was a Dow Jones Data Fellow in 2016, and I hope she'll talk a little bit about the Data Fellowship. She was in the first class of that data program. She trained by data experts at the headquarters of investigative reporters and editors at Columbia, Missouri, and then spent the summer working as a data reporter at the Salt Lake Tribune. In September 2016, she joined the Desert Sun in Palm Springs as an investigations editor. She mentored reporters in the USA Today network on data analysis and public records, and collaborated with other newsworms on data-driven enterprise stories. She was part of the team for the USA Today network that won the 2018 Pulitzer Prize in explanatory reporting for a project on the U.S.-Mexico border wall. To her left is Jess Goodman. She's a senior editor at Cosmopolitan Magazine, where she oversees the work and play section. She and her team won the National Magazine Award in personal service for last year's package, really great package, especially considering how many women are running for office this year. I think they all are running because they read Jess's package, How to Run for Office, Previously, she was digital news editor at Entertainment Weekly and an entertainment editor at Huffington Post. She graduated from Penn's College of Arts and Sciences in 2012, and it was the first of our Nora Prize winners to go to graduate school. When we originally thought of the Nora Prize, we thought it would be for people who didn't want to go to graduate school, who needed support when they were going to go out instead of graduate school. But we quickly realized that some of the students were going to want to go to graduate school, and Jess was really the one who sort of made us understand that. So when you mentor, sometimes you have in mind exactly what you're supposed to do, and other times the people you're mentoring hit you over the head and tell you what they actually need. And that happened in this case. And we've had others go to graduate school since then. While at Penn, she was editor-in-chief of 34th Street. So Ashley, why don't you go first? Tell us a little bit about your career experience, but also keeping in mind, if somebody wanted to have the track that you're on today, how they might do it differently, because the world's a little different.
Sure. I think that was a pretty good synopsis of my bio, so I'll tell you a little bit about Penn. I came here knowing I wanted to be a journalist. That was like one of the more appealing things to me. So I was like, at the DP's intro meeting as a freshman, and I started at the DP right away. I covered a couple beats. I was some sort of editor on the DP. I was on one of the boards, and then I was an editor on 34th Street. And then sort of my bio is what Steven said. I don't know if there's anything else I should expand on in that.
Well, I think it would be interesting. So when you came out of college, you thought about either full-time jobs, entry-level jobs, and then you went for a pretty an unusual full-time job, being assistant to a very big columnist of the Times.
Yeah.
Which was a career choice and an interesting one, and so I'm curious.
So I felt like, and I was mentioning this to him before, but right when I graduated in 2005, it felt like an actual kind of one of those pivot moments in journalism, and I was choosing between a job that I ultimately took as Maureen Dowd's research assistant, although I think my official title was secretary, and there truly is like no lower position at the New York Times than being like really avid Sunday reader, right? I was just a step up from that. Or taking a job at the New Times, Miami in Florida, where it would have been totally different. My understanding was I would have been like writing a lot of long form articles, which is ultimately what I wanted to do. And at that point, it still kind of felt like, do you go and try to get that job and then, get hired by, the paper in Manchester, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and then try to cover the State House in Austin and kind of work your way up so that when you're in your mid-40s, you end up at like the Times, the Post, or the Journal. Or do you kind of try to get your foot in the door at like the worst job at the best place, which is what I ended up doing. And it's interesting because my husband, who is 5 years older than me, he has a totally different career path, and it feels like it like changed in that moment. He also covers the White House for the Wall Street Journal, and he started off, he's from Ohio, he'd interned at Ohio papers. He went to Grand Junction. He worked for the paper in Grand Junction, Colorado. He moved to Denver, covered the State House there. He got hired by the Palm Beach Post. He worked down there. He moved to the St. Pete Times, which then was a very good paper. And so was the Palm Beach Post then. He was the St. Pete Times. They moved him up to Tallahassee. Basically, it's like a long story, but he sort of gets to D.C. and covering the White House in a very circuitous way. And if someone asks me now, like I want to cover campaign in 2020. What is the best way for me to do that? I think the old route would have been what he did, to go and learn how to actually be a really good reporter by covering cops, right, in some kind of random state you never imagined yourself going to, and then covering
all the states are important, Ashley.
No, and then covering a state house in another state, and then again, like ending up at the White House or on a campaign a little earlier or later in your career, rather. And what was interesting to me, the first campaign I covered, because I started at the Times, was I covered Mitt Romney's campaign in 2012. And I was about 29 for most of it. I think I started when I was 28, and I turned 30 at the very end of it, but I was 29. And I was one of the youngest reporters that the New York Times had ever sent out on the campaign trail. And that's not actually like necessarily a testament to how like good or how talented I was, but it was like you're single and you don't have any children and you can live out of a suitcase for the next year and a half. But among the reporters who were put on Mitt Romney and were put on the campaign trail, I was on the older end, right? Like most of them were like 23 and 24, and it was like, you can hold a camera and point it at the candidate, right? So it's all kind of skewing younger. So if someone, again, if someone asks me what to do, I would say the thing that makes the most sense is to try to get to a place that will let you do that, and let you do that when you're young. And so I'd say somewhere like Politico, or somewhere like BuzzFeed, or somewhere like Huffington Post, or, you know, maybe there's jobs, whatever, the Post, the Times, the Journal as well, but kind of get to the place, be a little like platform agnostic, and get to the place that will send you out and let you have those experiences. And I actually think it's probably pretty bad for journalism in general, because you're no longer getting to learn all those really important skills in a way where the stakes are less high. So your embarrassing mistake comes in a county council meeting and not, you know, with a Republican nominee for president. And God knows I made a ton of those mistakes. But I just think that is sort of the career path now in the way that media has moved.
It makes me raise the question, what was your interviewing experience interviewing presidential candidates before you went on the beat? I mean, did you do some of it with Maureen, or did you really sort of figure it out by the seat of your pants?
No, I did some of it with Maureen. I got lucky because she was sort of like a really good boss and mentor. But that was kind of a fluke, right? That I happened to end up with someone who was such a great mentor that I worked for her through the 2008 campaign. So she would bring me out to work dinners with like David Axelrod and all of the Obama people, or the McCain aides, and I would get to know them that way. But that was not part of my beat, right? I mean, my official job was fact-checking her column and stuff like that, but I was lucky enough that through her, I had written stories on, like, John Favreau, Obama's speechwriter. I'd gone and, like, interviewed then candidate Obama about Reggie Love, who I was doing a profile on, and watched them play basketball. But had it not been for sort of, like, Maureen being a good mentor and taking that initiative, I think I probably would have gone out covering Mitt Romney, having never interviewed a presidential candidate before.
So since you made this decision to work for her, I'm curious, what did she tell you might be the career path for you if you did work for her? I mean, since you were doing something different than going and working state houses.
So to her credit, she said, do not take this job if you expect that it will lead to a job at the New York Times, because it won't. And I, of course, was like, but I'll be different, but I'll be the exception, right? And I got really lucky. It did lead to a job at the New York Times, but it just as easily could not have. And so she was kind of like, we'll have a great time, it'll be a good experience, you'll learn lots of things, but like, do not take this job if the reason you were doing it is because you want to become a reporter at the New York Times, because like that will never happen. You will be disappointed and we'll both like end up hating each other. So.
And I will say that the conversations that we had over the years were about that too. I wanted to make sure that they were going to take care of you, because you would put in a lot of time.
And to be fair, there were no indications that they were, right?
But it's interesting, both you, two people who in trying to mentor people were saying, like, do you have other options here? I remember having lots of conversations with you when Matt Flegenheimer, who's a little younger and also went to the Times, and had one of their summer internships and then just didn't leave. Even though they didn't hire him, he just kind of sat there and kept writing stories, and they kept paying him every week. And I think they just eventually thought that he worked there, and so he almost had a beat, so they just kind of gave him a beat. But during that time, I would talk to him. He turned down a job at the Post.
Yeah.
Because he really wanted that. So I will say that keep in mind that you can have conversations with mentors, but ultimately you make your own decisions, you own your own decisions, and that's a thing that your mentors won't tell you, because your mentors will tell you to listen to them. And so I'm very publicly happy to apologize to Ashley for all the times I asked her what her internship, her work with Maureen would end up leading to.
And the final point I would make was that the thing that kind of kept me going, and one final bit of advice is I was Maureen Dodd's research assistant for 5 years. Even if your boss is a wonderful boss, like 5 years is way too long to be an entry-level assistant. Like, just do not do it for 5 years. But the one thing that kind of kept me doing it was while I was doing that job of being her research assistant, I was writing a lot for the Times. I was sort of pitching stories as a freelancer, but they were accepting them, and they were, I'd had something in the Sunday magazine, I'd had something on the front page, I'd had something in just about every section of the paper, including some that no longer even exist, like Escapes or City. So I did sort of feel like if I left that job, part of me sort of felt like, well, I'll become a waitress and freelance, so I might as well be a research assistant and freelance. So that was one thing that when, like, Stephen was giving me a hard time, made me feel like I was at least doing a little bit of what I wanted to be doing.
And one of the things that I'll say that you did that I thought was really smart especially the one story for the Times Magazine you did, they were young stories. They were stories that, so Ashley, tell them about this one story, which I do think is probably the story that made people at the Times realize that you should be writing there. No, but it did. But it's also, a lot of times younger reporters want to pitch stories that are too old for them. Like, if you have a young writer and they're not developed yet, what you want is them to pitch a story that they would know because they are of an age group that you're not. That's why young people are at publications, sometimes at a frightening level. I mean, I remember when I worked for Condé Nast, I realized that basically everybody there was really old, and the only things they knew about young people were from their assistants. So the assistants, if the assistant said, like, do you know this thing is really cool? Then it would be in Vogue, or it would be in Vanity Fair, because the editor would have no idea. They wouldn't go, you know. And you can see, like, the whole history of fashion is just like some kid saying, I heard this CBGB place is a cool thing. Oh, really? You know, Polly Mellon goes down and has a picture taken there. So I do think that it's important to think about the things that you know about that can be turned into nonfiction stories that people will say, yes, I'll take a chance on you because you might know something about this I don't know.
So my competitive advantage at a place like the Times, which has become a lot younger, but especially back in 2005, especially in the DC bureau, was that I was not like a 55-year-old white man. And I quickly realized that if I had pitched, even if I claimed like I had this amazing insight on like Hillary Clinton's policy in Pakistan, they would have been like, that's great, kid, like go tell it to the Hillary Clinton reporter, right? But what I could write that no one else at the Times cared about or was thinking about was I could say like, hey, there's this bar in Georgetown where the Bush twins go and get wasted every night, and like we should do a profile on them in that bar, right? Or, you know, this doesn't sound that new or cool now, but in 2005, kickball leagues, adult kickball leagues were something new, right? And I was like, adults are playing kickball and dodgeball, right? And so I could get a piece in on that. Or like, there's this crazy thing called Facebook, and when I broke up with my boyfriend, it like really emotionally devastated me. Like, how about a first-person essay? And so that's not what like the traditional Times reporter was concerning themselves with. And so the piece I did for the magazine was I did a piece on young Obama Washington, which was kind of like hanging out with all, at the time, the Obama cool kids like John Favreau and Reggie Love, and just the way they were taking over the city and changing it. And that was something that, I knew about because I was their age, right? And but for the fact that I was a journalist, I, you know, could have just as easily been a Republican or Democratic campaign operative, and I knew the bars and I knew the scenes. And even when they like ignore me and wouldn't communicate with me, I could like still run into them out and like write up scenes for the piece. And so that was like, yeah. And I got really lucky when I ran into John Favreau, who at the time was dating Rashida Jones, like out getting, like out at a club, late at night. And so I was able to just like get kind of scenes even when they weren't participating, right? Because that was like my world and I knew it. And I had like no shame about being like, well, I saw this and I'm writing it. And so that helped.
But the key is also to be able to then turn that into professional writing. And I do think but I think that's always the challenge. I mean, people have access to things, but it's also like, what does a magazine article in the New York Times look like with this material in it? That is something that you still have to make that step forward besides having all that access, and that's a learnable thing. And so sometimes I think people don't understand. It's about access, it's about ideas, but it's also about what does this look like in print in a place I read? Or if I'm interested in broadcast media, what is a broadcast piece? What does a radio piece look like? What's the structure of it? And that's actually stuff that you can be doing here. Because in fact, you know, to understand how to build these things, that's a learnable skill that starts in college. Having access to the professional world is different, but you know, a lot of these guys did work as undergrads that could have been published in other places, and that kind of access is getting more and more available than it was when any of them were here. So I'm going to move on to Jill, who's the youngest of this group. So Jill, tell us about your slightly less long arc, but it's also in an area that most of us know nothing about, which is data journalism. And so why don't you tell us about just sort of how you came out of the DP and what you've been doing.
Sure. I don't really have an arc yet, so I'll let you know when I do.
It's like a
it's working on it.
It's a curve.
It's a curve. So I was editor-in-chief of the Daily Pennsylvanian, and when I graduated, I was thinking, how do I move from that to a professional, career in journalism? And I had my sights on doing investigative reporting. I wanted to do that somewhere, somehow, and I want to be able to do it in the long term. I want this to be my career. And a lot of the advice I was getting was, you're going to have to wait a while to do that kind of work. And so I applied for a bunch of internships and fellowships. Some of them I didn't get, some of them I did, and when I was in the process of choosing, I talked to the head of investigative reporters and editors at the time, Mark Horvit, who said, I really think you should do this data journalism program because it will only help you in your career.
Explain what investigative reporters and editors is.
It is a...
How do you know what IRE is? Okay, good. Explain what it is.
Okay. It's a group that they do a lot of conferences and trainings on how to be an investigative reporter or a watchdog reporter, or really just to develop your skills as a journalist. They do small conferences. They have trainers. They travel around the country. They do workshops on everything from, how to conduct an interview to, here's how to code in Python and scrape a web page. And so they have everything in between. You get a really cheap discount membership if you're a student, which is what I did. So I highly recommend that. And you get a bunch of free stuff with it once you're a member.
It's based at the journalism school in Columbia, Missouri,
Yeah.
the University of Missouri Journalism School.
Yeah.
And it does have a lot of outreach and a lot of things that you can do from here. There's another organization not dissimilar called Pointer, Poynter, that has a lot of online teaching for journalistic skills, classes you can take, conventions you can go to learn specific skills. Penn students don't do this as much as they probably could, because if you're writing at that level for the DP, for Street, or for yourself in a nonfiction writing class, there's no reason why you shouldn't think about these things. These people would be peeing themselves if you came. They would give you money to come because they want younger people to come to these things. So a Pointer, IRE, and also in different skill set groups, say the organization that's for healthcare reporters or different. So there's a number of reporters organizations. Be very happy that somebody young who's interested in this, whether you're associated with the DP or just do it for class, if you want to be part of their things, because they do a lot more trainings, teachings, and a lot of online podcasts and things you can do. So anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, definitely. I definitely highly recommend IRE. Get involved there. So he said you should do this, and so I agreed and I did it. And what they did was they flew me to Columbia, Missouri for a week, and they have these people who are amazing journalists who are really, they know what they're doing, and we had a week-long boot camp, morning to night, and they taught us everything about what data journalism is, from working in Excel to working in more advanced programs to mapping different things, and how we can use these tools to help tell stories and to find stories. And I think that has really launched my career ahead of a lot of people my age, fortunately, because I have found that a lot of places are hiring for people with these skills. Either they're going to say data reporter, or they're going to say, watchdog reporter with data skills. You have to know how to scrape a web page, or you have to have some, understand Excel. They're expecting you to come in with some understanding of data and how to use data in your reporting. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind. And so I got that training, and then they paired me up. This is through the Dow Jones News Fund. I applied through them, and they connected me with IRE, and then they sent me to Salt Lake City, and I was a data reporter there for a summer. And part of the program is they have someone there who's a mentor for you to help, hone your skills, where you practice and you get better at, kind of coding and things like that. And I got to write some stories, and they kind of forgot about me at the Salt Lake Tribune because I wasn't a full-time reporter and they weren't expecting stories from me. So I got to, instead of writing things all the time, do a couple projects that I could really own, that were long stories, and they were things that no one else was writing about, even though they were interesting, because they didn't know anything about the data. So one example is I was looking at chronic absenteeism, and there's this huge data set that the federal government, the Department of Justice, puts out about people who are chronically absent from school, students, and their demographics. What are their race, what's their gender, et cetera. And what I found when I was analyzing this data was that in Utah, Native American students are really chronically absent from school, and they're more chronically absent from school than other Native American students in other states. So I thought, what is going on here? And that was a touchstone for me to do a much bigger project about Native American education in Utah, and about how the resources weren't there because there are so many there's so many Native Americans in Utah who don't belong to tribes, so they're not able to access these federally funded programs for Native Americans because they're not recognized as Native American students. So it's kind of a long story, but
That's a great story.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing where no one was looking at it. No one would have known it if they hadn't seen the data. And because they forgot about me, I was able to do that story. And then something really weird happened, which I was looking for jobs as the kind of fellowship wound down, and someone just called me and said, I have a job opening that I think you would be good for, which I don't think happens that much, I don't know. It was a executive editor of a small paper in Palm Springs, California called The Desert Sun, and he said, I really need someone with data skills. I can't find anyone, and I know you did editing in college, and I know you have data skills. Will you come on and be an editor for us at the paper? I was like, okay.
You're what, 24?
I'm 23 at the time, and I'm like, okay.
Luckily, you look old.
Yeah, I know, I look. And so I moved there, having never been to Palm Springs, California before, and I had a team of reporters. It was weird, and there were 5 of them, and they were rock stars, and they covered. They had beats, and the way that it worked in a small local newsroom like that nowadays, when you don't have a ton of people, is they called it an investigative team, but it was like topic areas that they were expected to spend some time on. They weren't writing every day, but they weren't, like spending a year on a story. So like someone was an immigration reporter and they'd write every couple weeks, and then maybe they'd take a month to do something deeper. And so I kind of played this dual role of where like I worked with them on their stories and I edited the stories, and I also did data analysis for the newsroom. And I did trainings for the newsroom to help them, because I think that a lot of the older people in the newsroom like didn't know anything. I had to explain a few times how to
This is a computer.
This is a computer. There were a couple times it was kind of like that. It was like, okay, here's how you like stretch out the Excel column, and they were like, oh, this is amazing. Like there's more than this. This is just the beginning. And then because I was out west and it was at this small paper, the Desert Sun is connected to a lot of other small newspapers through the USA Today network, because USA Today and Gannett own all of these other newspapers, these local papers. And so they sent me out to other newsrooms to do trainings as well, and I got really connected to the other people there, and I ended up working on some projects with other newsrooms, and getting in touch with like the investigative team at USA Today and collaborating on all sorts of projects through that. So
Tell us about. We'll wait to tell you about your story. Tell us about your new
Yes.
job now, and then.
And so my new job now is So I left in February to move down to San Diego to work for a place called iNewsSource, which is a nonprofit investigative journalism news outlet. And that was a strategic decision for me because I want to continue to do investigative journalism. The places that I had been, I had seen layoffs while I was there at the Desert Sun. I saw layoffs while I was at the Salt Lake Tribune, and I want to be able to have a job like a few years from now. So when I talk to people, and just from what I've been seeing around, is that nonprofit journalism is a growing, small but growing a little bit area of journalism. And I'd been waiting for potentially an opportunity to break into that and see if that was a good fit. And so it happened again where someone just reached out to me and said, we can't find a data person. So I'm telling you, you should go learn some data. And then I ended up joining, and it's been great. We don't have a newspaper. We publish online, and we partner with the local radio stations, the TV stations, and I can spend however much time I want to on any story. And I focus mostly on campaign finance right now until the 2018 election is over. But yeah,
Is it regional to San Diego or to Southern California, or is it national?
It's regional. Yeah, and we do local television. We do San Diego, NPR. I go on.
And
a lot.
Are there other nonprofits like that in other parts of California or other states like that?
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot. There's a growing number of nonprofit investigative journalism outlets. There's a group called INN, which is Investigative Nonprofit News. And you can go, I think you can look them up and see all these different places that are members. This is you've probably heard of ProPublica or Reveal.
Do you guys know what ProPublica is? So raise your hand if you don't know what ProPublica is. Okay, so ProPublica is the largest of these nonprofit investigative units. It has tons of money. Actually, a lot of Penn people work at ProPublica. If you're interested in investigative reporting, there's been a corridor from Penn to ProPublica for a long time. But so ProPublica is national, and if you look at the end of lots of stories in the Times that are big enterprise stories, there'll be combinations of a Times reporter and a ProPublica reporter. There are also starting to be regional things. The biggest one is the Texas Tribune. In the future, there will probably be state nonprofit reporting combines like the Texas Tribune in most states. But they do the same exact work that local papers used to do, but in a more efficient way. And maybe somebody from here will start the one for Pennsylvania, because God knows Pennsylvania needs one desperately.
Yeah.
And it's only all the fracking reporting that's been done in Pennsylvania has been done by ProPublica, which if it hadn't, a lot of the fracking stuff that we know wouldn't be known. But in reality, the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette a long time ago thought about creating something like that. Yeah, but they say they're going to do it like every.
I worked at the Lamp Fest this summer.
Are they actually doing it?
It's called PA Spotlight.
Okay, well,
Or Spotlight PA.
I've heard it said they're going to do it so many times that until it actually starts being a big thing, let's see. But that'd be great. So that's great. You can talk about that. Okay, so Jess, tell us about how you got to Cosmo.
Yeah, so like Steven said, after college, I kind of thought about going to journalism school. I was the editor-in-chief of 34th Street while I was here. I had internships at Rolling Stone and New York Magazine, but I didn't really feel like I knew how to be a quote-unquote reporter. And so that, to me, journalism school was the way that I thought I could do that. So I did Columbia's program. It was only a year. While I was there, I definitely learned how to report. I read a ton I think I just really increased my overall education about journalism. And while I was there, I was also writing at the Village Voice a lot. I was still interning at New York Magazine. I tried to keep one foot in the professional world as well. And I think journalism school, especially Columbia, has changed a lot since I went there. I graduated in 2013. They've totally redone their curriculum. It's much more modern, so I hear, though Stephen might have some more insight. But it was definitely a 1-year crash course in how to be a quote-unquote reporter, though I think that the rules that I learned there have totally changed since even I graduated. And then after Columbia, I got a fellowship at HuffPost, where I was basically an intern for 4 months before I came on full time to be an entertainment editor, where I did blog aggregation and original reporting and hardcore internet news grinding for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for a year and a half. And
Sounds so glamorous.
So glamorous, living that New York dream. And then my boss was leaving. He was going to run Entertainment Weekly's website, and I went with him to be a digital news editor, which basically means that I ran their books vertical and their music vertical for the website, doing the same kind of online news grind, but also commissioning some freelance work, working with really cool writers, kind of taking on a more editor role. And that was kind of where I got my first taste of what it was like to work for a print magazine as well. I got to deputy edit those sections of the magazine every week, which was super fun. And while I was there, I was kind of ready to give up that hardcore online news grind where you're just blogging day in and day out. And I really had always wanted to work at Cosmo, to be honest. It was always the dream of mine. And so they got a new editor-in-chief. I applied for a couple jobs there. I ended up coming on as a senior editor to work on what we call the work and play section. It's basically career, finance, entertaining, food, lots and lots of random lifestyle things. And I only work on the print magazine now, which is totally weird because I feel that's I'm one of maybe 50 people in the world that still does that. It's
Print only.
Yeah, print only. Because Cosmo is owned by this company called Hearst Magazines, which also owns, Elle and Marie Claire, Town and Country, Esquire. It's one of the only big magazine companies out there right now where digital and print are totally separate. So while some of you may be more familiar with Cosmo's brand through Cosmo.com or the Cosmo Snapchat Discover channel, we work totally separate from their teams. We're actually in a different building, which is super weird. Obviously, we keep in really close contact with their team, but we work under totally different schedules and purviews and deadlines and budgets, and it's super interesting. A lot of other companies aren't like that. Yeah, that's my vibe.
So tell us we'll go back this way with your story. So tell us about your National Magazine Award-winning project.
Yeah, so soon after I got to Cosmo, it was, we were basically told, we are going to we're going to try to be the leading voice of telling women that they should run for office, that now is the time to do that. And, you know, it was kind of spurred on, obviously, because of the 2016 election. And we saw that there were so few women actually running for office. And we thought, you know, we, as the leading women's magazine in the world, like, we can be the people to tell readers to do that. Unlike where some of these guys work, Cosmo is a service magazine, which basically means that everything that you read in the magazine is instructive, it's helpful, it's kind of like telling you what you can or what you can do or how you can do it. So, like, you know, just like we give sex tips in the magazine, we wanted to give tips on how to actually run for office. We thought that that was like our entry point into it. Also, because we're a nonpartisan magazine, we couldn't, you know, come down on one side or the other. We do try to stay as partisan or as nonpartisan as possible. So this was a project that we did team up with the digital team for. We were like we worked on it for about 6 months. You know, I was part of the team that was editing this piece. So it was basically 10 pages in the magazine with like lots of little bitsy parts of, you know, how do you literally get your name on the ballot? How do you go knock on doors? How do you raise money? How do you ask your friends for money? How do you write a stump speech? Like, how do you literally do anything? How do you work with people across the aisle? So part of my job was, you know, working with the reporters and the writers to get the kind of content that we needed, to work with the designers to actually make it all fit on the page and look beautiful, to conceptualize the photography, to do everything under the sun, from like coming up with captions to like interviewing like Kirsten Sinema, who's a congresswoman from Arizona. And what that really taught me was that being a magazine editor is not just like actually being an editor and working with words. And I think a lot of reporting is this way too, where you actually you work as a producer. You're doing so many of the logistics behind the scenes, and so much time is spent on like, does this all look beautiful? Does this give off the, you know, the vibe that we're trying to convey? It's about more than just the words, I think. So it was a real learning experience for me, and it was all done in-house. It was about 10 or 15 of us working like nonstop for 6 months until it came out, and we were very, very pleased with the project.
Which other politicians did you work with on it?
Wendy Davis is in there, which is really exciting. Hillary Clinton wrote the keynote of the piece, which was like our big white whale. We
In magazines, there's a name for everything
Yes.
that you have to have. So
we really wanted to interview a lot of women running locally, like for state senate and for you know, state assembly and stuff. So we interviewed Erin May Quaid from Minnesota. Who else? We had some like kind of behind the scenes people too, like Rhonda Romney, who works at the RNC. We had Letitia James, she's the New York City public advocate, and she's actually running for Attorney General this week or today in the primary. So we really looked at like everyone, like everyone that we could. And something that was interesting to me was we did reach out to every single Republican woman in Congress, like in the House and the Senate. And none of them would talk to us for this piece. Yeah. It was really interesting. Yeah, it was hard. It was really hard to get Republican women to talk to us because we are pro-choice.
you're sex positive.
We're sex positive. We're pro-choice. So it was really hard to find Republicans. We really wanted to get we wanted to get Kirsten Gillibrand and Susan Collins, I think, to talk to each other and kind of transcribe that conversation. And it just didn't end up working out, and so we ended up getting Kate Brown, who's the governor of Oregon, to like talk to her like best Republican friend in the state assembly, which was really cool. But yeah, like we tried so hard to get Elise Stefanik, who's the youngest woman in Congress. She is a Republican from upstate New York, and she just said no, which was very surprising to us. But I think she did talk to Marie Claire for something similar. So
Marie Claire's not sex positive.
no, they are, but you know.
Was Martha McSally?
Yes, Martha McSally was in our online component. Yeah, she did a really interesting piece about. I think she wrote an op-ed for us, or did an As Told to, about what it's like to be a mother in Congress. Yeah, it was really interesting. So yeah, it was
Great section.
definitely the
A
career
great,
highlight so far.
innovative magazine section. A lot of people worked on it, and it won the National Magazine Award. The National Magazine Award is the equivalent of the Pulitzer Prizes for magazines. Jill, tell us about the project that you worked on that won the Pulitzer for the USA Today team.
Yeah, so it was a project that the idea started with the Arizona Republic and the editors there, and they thought, what could we do? There's a lot of talk about the border wall. We have local newsrooms in the USA Today network in all the states along the border. Can we pool our resources and do something that no one else can do? And so they pulled on editors and reporters from each of those newsrooms. We were like the only one in California that was pulled on, but we had the Arizona Republic, we had the El Paso Times, and the goal was let's do a project about what the problems are at the border already. If we're going to talk about building a border wall, if this is really the conversation we're going to have, then people should know the problems that already exist, and they should have an interesting way to engage with that information. They need to really understand it. And so it was a project that was attacked from all sides, and all sorts of specialists and different kinds of journalism storytelling were brought on. There were people who did virtual reality. They flew up in a helicopter and they did video of what the border looks like from above, and they did there were podcasts, and there were news stories, and my role was data analysis. And so I worked with a reporter from the Arizona Republic, and our job was to try to figure out how many people die crossing the border every year, and we got a number that was much higher than what the government says it is. And that's because their estimates are based on how many bodies federal officers actually find. But there are way more people who die than they find. And so we went state by state and county by county, and we gathered all of the records from using autopsy reports and things like that. And so it was a massive project. There were 30 plus people involved across 4 different newsrooms, but it came out to be something really cool.
How long were you working on that?
It was 7 or more months. Yeah.
Doing nothing but that, or you did
No,
other things too?
I did other things too. It was on and off.
Yeah, you always remember when people tell you how long they worked on a story or on a book, they probably did other things too. Went to
Yeah.
the bathroom, went on vacation, So, Ashley, tell us about the post-Pulitzer.
Sure.
Program.
So I have been told never to describe it this way, but basically the truth is, and then I can break it down, but I was a very small part of a very large team, and so I was basically on one of the stories in our 10-story Pulitzer package, and the reason I was told never to describe it that way is because apparently no guy would ever describe it that way, and I should just say I won a Pulitzer, and as Maureen Dowd told me, she's like, it counts, right? But the truth is, I was on, one of these stories on an 11-person team that produced 10 stories total that we submitted. And we actually produced many more stories, but the package had to be, I believe, 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so this, I don't know, I'd be actually curious to know how my editors conceive of it. It seems a little bit less of a project than what you two both did. But I cover the White House for the Post, and one of the through lines of this White House is the Russia meddling and the Russian collusion and what the president did and did not know, an obstruction of justice. And we didn't sort of conceive of it as a project per se, but we have a whole separate team, separate from our White House team, that's the sort of Russia investigative unit, and they're doing a lot of stories on that. And then my particular story was the story that basically broke the news that when President Trump had been flying back from Europe, I can't remember if it was the G7 or the G20, but he was flying back from Europe on Air Force One, that he had actually dictated the misleading statement that his son, Donald Trump Jr., put out about that now infamous Trump Tower meeting with the Russians where they were promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. And I kind of came to that in my role as a White House reporter, which was that, I don't know how well you remember, but as that story unfolded, the New York Times broke the first version that Don Jr. had a meeting with the Russians, and Don Jr.'s first statement was but it was just to talk about adoption, and we chatted for 20 minutes about adoption, and that was kind of it. And over 2 or 3 days, the story kept changing and changing and changing, and having covered the White House long enough, I kind of knew in the first statement came out, I was aware of while President Trump was flying back from Europe. And so that story has 4 bylines on it. 2 of the bylines were myself and my colleague Phil Rucker, who I work really closely with and who also covers the White House. And we just sort of knew enough about this White House to be that must have been a crazy scene on Air Force One, right? And that was literally sort of the genesis of being let's try to figure out what happened on Air Force One when the president is flying back and his son is getting ready to put out this statement that turns out to be a total lie, and what was his involvement. And we didn't know if we would find out that he was like watching cable news and yelling, right? Or eating really good Air Force One steak. But what we ended up finding out was, in addition to all those things, he was dictating this misleading statement. And that was our story. That was the contribution to the package. And I will say, the Post also very consciously, the editors, because there were so many people contributing to the Russia coverage, when they went to choose the stories we submitted for the Pulitzer, they really tried to pull stories that included the bylines and reportings of sort of everyone who they felt had contributed. So there were a lot of stories that could have gone one way or the other, but it was important for them to have some representation from the White House team, from the investigative team, from the national security team. And so I do think when you look at our group, it is really a good cross-section of all of the people who had a little bit of a very big story.
It seemed like the Trump administration in general has created a lot of projects that have multi-writer stories. Both the Post and the Times, and a lot of the Pulitzers this year were for a lot of people, which is not, it's not that it never happens, but it seems like it's happening more, and it's good that they're including everybody. I'm curious, in the case of this story, was there press on Air Force One who could help with this, or they didn't see any of this, you were just talking to the people who were behind the scenes?
So there was press on Air Force One. There's always a small, it's called the White House Correspondents Association travel pool that travels on Air Force One. But it's a little misleading in that when you're there, you're totally separate from what's happening in the rest of the plane. The press is in like a back cabin that has like the 13 of you. You can't go anywhere. The president is like, it's a huge plane. The president is like 5 or 6 rooms up, and to get to him, you have to go through like there's Secret Service, and then there's aides, and then there's a conference room, and then there's more Secret Service. So it's really, again, you're there. The reason we have it is called a protective pool. You're there in case something happens, right? Like the protective pool was the pool that had gone with George W. Bush down to Florida to read to kindergartners on the day of 9/11, and suddenly they're whisked around and you're there for history and posterity's sake, but there's no world in which you have any awareness of what's happening in the front cabins.
Mm-hmm.
So that was not helpful, I guess is the...
And so have you worked on other Russian collusion stories, or this was just, you just happen to be involved in this one? It's not your main area of focus.
Yeah, I've done some other Russia coverage here or there because, again, the story of the White House is so intertwined with the story of Russia. But this was probably the biggest one that also kind of like took the most time, and we just kept on feeling like there's more there if we just talk to this person, and now we have this detail, and maybe we talk to that person, and it kind of took a long time for this one story to come together.
So what was the White House's response to the story when you published it?
A couple things. I mean, some people said like it was fair and accurate, which was obviously our goal. But I think I feel like at some point Sarah Sanders and others stood up from the podium and said like we were wrong. They said like the president didn't dictate this. They denied the story. They said it wasn't true. And then something came out down the road, whether it was someone testifying, I'm getting this a little wrong, but whether after the story had already run, and I think it may have even been after the Pulitzer package was submitted, but it then came out in either testimony to Mueller, or testimony before Congress, or people's lawyers that Trump had in fact dictated this statement as we had reported. So it was a nice, we don't report anything we don't believe to be true, obviously, but it was a nice like extra layer of vindication that we really did get it right.
But no one ever apologizes when they denied the whole thing.
No.
Let's take some questions. We have a cordless microphone. Who has questions for our panel? You're kidding. You are journalists, right? Some of you? Okay. Start there and then on the front. Go ahead.
Hi. So you talk a lot about working as a team, working with different collaborators. And in college, I feel like it's weird. It's difficult when the stories aren't as big. So could you guys talk about your experience working on multi-writer stories or trying to collaborate in college and how that might have helped you or how you felt about it?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like when I was an editor at Street that was the experience when I had the most collaboration, especially being the editor-in-chief. Like I'm not sure if the structure has changed much, but I worked extremely close with the design editor, I think that was her title, and the managing editor to like create the whole magazine. Like it was never just like me alone like dictating what I thought we should be covering. And that was when I realized like I loved working with a team. Like I felt that it was that was the best way that like I could produce my own best work, but also like I really just loved like, you know, being like, what about this? What about this? Like, let's spitball ideas and like brainstorm together. And that's definitely been my favorite part about working at Cosmo, like how collaborative it is. Like I work with designers and photographers and writers and fact checkers all the time, and I love that. But I think in college, like the best way to get that experience is to like sound out your ideas with other people. And if you like find someone who's like interested in what you're interested in, you know, like find ways that maybe you can work on a project together, or just be like, hey, do you want to like go sit somewhere and like write together? And like that's actually what I love doing with some of my co-editors. Like, you know, I sit next to the wellness editor who covers all things health, and we just like talk all day about like, hey, does this phrase sound weird? Like, do you think this is a good idea? Like, should I pitch this to the executive editor? And I feel like cultivating like those resources is such a awesome way to grow and learn and like see what makes you better also.
I would agree with that and add, so I was editor-in-chief of the Daily Pennsylvanian, and I think that I learned a lot collaborating that way, but I think one of the ways that we tried to train the younger reporters was to pair them up with one of the most veteran reporters on the staff. So there are plenty of times where we would, you know, there was someone who probably could have done a story by themselves on their beat. They're covering, you know, College Hall or whatever, and they know their stuff, but maybe we should just stick someone on it with them, and they can work on it together, and have some way for the younger people to learn from example. And that, when I first started, was extremely helpful, working with some of the older staffers who kind of knew the questions to ask, and that made it easier.
I think you're right in that I'm thinking back to being a reporter. I didn't really have that many double bylines in college. One place where I kind of got that type of collaboration was some of the creative writing courses I took here and through the English program, and it's not quite the same thing, but it was very much like workshopping a piece, right? So you would write nonfiction and you would bring it in, and then the whole class would dissect it and say like, this didn't really ring true, like I didn't love this lead, why did you start this way, like I would have changed this word, and you're kind of getting that feedback. But professionally, I love it, and I feel like I've been so lucky, both at the Times and the Post. I've had really close partners at both places who we have like a very similar writing sensibility and voice, which is kind of rare, and people always have questions about, it's funny, like my parents, like their only question is, they're like, there's 3 bylines, like how did that happen? Like, why are you third? Like, what made you second today? Like, how does it work? And in explaining it, there's a lot of different ways it can work, but for me especially, and again, I feel so incredibly lucky, I'm often like I would say like, well, like I wrote, like we sat in Phil's office and like I wrote this sentence, and then like he deleted half of it and changed that clause, and then we like fought over this word, and then like I did this, and then he said like, that sounds good, but what if we punch it up here, and like that's the sentence, right? Like it's super hyper collaborative, and like he knows like he knows that I'm a horrible speller, and I know that
You're a horrible speller?
It's confusing. And like I know that he used to be a like very competitive figure skater, and so he missed he was like homeschooled for a couple of years, and he missed like all the grammar, and so like I'm gonna be responsible for that. But so like you really know, so I've been lucky to have partners who I know like really intimately, and not every collaboration works quite like that, but that's the model I most like.
I will point out one thing, though. Just keep one thing in mind. There are, especially in college, I think there's always pros and cons to doing stories together with people. Because the other side of this, and I know when we do the prize stuff sometimes, when there are co-byline stories, I hear the story, well, I did this and somebody else did this. So what I would say is the people who get to do this at the highest level can do their own work. And the challenge of working collaboratively is, do you need to work collaboratively to do a story, or do you want to do it with your friend? And there are pros and cons to that, I can tell you. Just like if you do any project with another student, the other student doesn't do the same kind of work that you do, or whatever it is. So all I would say is, it's a good thing to try. It's a good thing to do when you're younger and you're learning the skills. But by the time that you're a junior and a senior, the biggest question you have is, can I do a big story myself? Now later on, you may be in a situation where you're going to work collaboratively. But I would note, and I think I'm right, Ashley, that for the first couple of years you didn't do that many collaborative stories.
Yeah,
it's more now
And-
because of the nature of what you do.
Yeah, and I would also add a couple things. One thing I really liked moving from the Times to the Post was that it forced me out of my comfort zone, and I knew at the place I had started, like, I knew all the ways to compensate for my weaknesses, right? Like, I knew, like, oh, I'm not quite that great at writing this sort of authoritative story, but if I'm teamed up with this reporter, they can do the hard work here. Or, like, I'm not as well sourced with whatever, like, congressional Democrats as I like, but, like, I'll just do a story with this person, and they can talk to all the congressional Democrats. And so, like, just kind of changing jobs, like, forced me out of my comfort zone and forced me to do all of those things on my own, which was, like, terrifying and awful, but also made me a lot better. And even now, as much as I love collaboration, I also, like, whatever, like, once a week or every couple of weeks, I'll write, like, a single byline story, and I just like it to kind of remember, like, to remind myself, like, oh, that's right, like, I do have all of these skills, right? And I can report something totally on my own and write it totally on my own and handle deadline totally on my own. And so I do think, as much as I'm, like, a huge proponent of collaboration, it is good to have that mix, to show that to your editors and to the outside world, and just to kind of have the confidence in yourself of, like, I can do this.
Because when it's all said and done, people move up because they can do really good work themselves. If they end up in collaborative situations, that's great, but they get into them because they both can do the work themselves. And Ashley would solve problems differently than some of the people in her group, but together they'll do other work faster. But that's also that's not all work is like that. I mean, there's many other stories in the Post that are single byline stories.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that your goal is to not do one or the other, because I think in college sometimes people get into the writing partner mentality, and that has its pros and cons too. So I would say learn how to do both. Learn how to collaborate, but learn how to do your own big story that's multitasking, so that you learn those tasks too. We had a question right up front. Can we bring the mic up here? Right here. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm from the DP. That's a group of people from the DP.
Wave.
So my question was, after graduation, was there something particularly, an experience or a skill that you learned at the DP or just in college that you were particularly grateful to have learned here rather than before leaving school?
That's a good question. Anybody have a good answer?
Well, I guess I was glad that I had time to be an editor, because then it kind of helped me get my job as an editor. Someone had seen that I'd had that experience before and worked with groups before. And I think learning some of those management skills early on were helpful. So the first time that I came into that role, I kind of knew what I was doing, and I also knew how to work with a team, like we just talked about collaboration. So those kinds of, like, teamwork dynamics were definitely helpful for me.
I think, I'm grateful that I learned, like, sort of how to pitch. Like, when I was at Street, we would, kind of have to, like, verbally pitch our stories with all of the editors in a room. So, like, I was the food and drink editor for a while and the ego editor, and I would have to, like, pitch my stories out loud to the editor in front of everybody else. And that was really scary. I've had to do that at every job that I've had. So even if I wasn't, like, amazing at it, and I still think, that's something that a lot of people, especially me, need to work on. It was great to have that experience to be like, okay, like, I think we should do this person as Ego of the Week because, like, they have this thing coming out and, like, this is a news peg and, like, this is why they're interesting right now. And being able to do that now is, like, still, I think you have to do that in any kind of journalism job that you have.
And I feel like I was glad that I learned how to, like, write and report on deadline. And so when I started at the Times and I would pitch a story and get an assignment, it didn't mean it wasn't daunting and it wasn't at a sort of different level, but I still, again, kind of had, like, the confidence in myself of, like, yeah, like, I know these basic building blocks. I know how to go out and talk to people and write something up and, like, file on deadline and maybe able to get a heavier edit than it did at the DP, but, like, I didn't feel like a crushing paralysis, right? It was sort of like a muscle memory of, like, at the end of the day, it's like writing and reporting, and that was helpful.
I'll actually answer that question too, because I don't think it's that different generationally. I mean, I still think one of the most profound experiences is just to be able to finish stories and have them be in print. I think we underestimate what it takes just to say, I'm going to do this story, I'm going to do this reporting, I'm going to fight with my editor, I'm going to go back and rewrite it, it's going to come out, I'm going to deal with the consequences of it, and I'm going to get up and do it again. And the ability to do that, I mean, I was in, my whole career has been in magazines, so I worked at 34th Street, and I've always worked at magazines and written longer stories, but I think that that's true. Every writer that I've dealt with, whether they were news side or magazine side, whether they went into broadcast or radio, I think people underestimate the importance of just finishing published work. And what scares me is that you can get through pen and do a lot of nonfiction writing and not publish anything. And that's one of the downsides of having so much encouragement of nonfiction writing in classes, and some people having real fear of going to the DP or 34th Street. If you want to work in this field, you need to learn the skill sets of how to report and how to write, but you also have to learn how to work with people who publish stuff in whatever platform, whether it's in print, whether it's online. So I would encourage you, even if you had the worst initial experience walking into the DP building, which we hear these stories time and time again, and believe me, we heard them when we were there too. People would walk in and say, like, I can't do this, I'm afraid of this. In reality, if you are interested in being in any part of the media, use the media at Penn to try out what it is like to propose a thing and finish it and then do another thing, because that is an essential skill set. And no matter how good a writer you are in your classes, if you don't have that experience, you will be hampered for not having had that experience. Other questions? In the back there? Or, well, here, we have one here because you're closer to the microphone, and then we'll get you, okay? Right here?
Hi, I'm Marina. I was just wondering, you guys were talking about how young writers are starting to get more responsibility, I guess, and I was just wondering if you think, what you think could, I'm sorry, I can't speak today. How you think we can make ourselves stand out when we're applying for jobs? You know, I feel like a lot of us all write for different publications on campus, but how can we make ourselves unique, or if there's any skills that you think are lacking at your publications right now that you think could improve, that the young generation could help out with?
I think something I've noticed working with specifically interns and like entry-level journalists or reporters or just people in general is that so many people like it's almost shocking, like the lack of professionalism sometimes, like the way you like. We were interviewing interns, and I was like, brought into like one of the meetings with an intern, and we were like, what days can you work? Like, what's your school schedule like? And she was very flippant with us and was like, well, I could maybe come in like two hours on Monday and like maybe 3 hours on Tuesday, but like, I don't know, I have to like do blah, 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 blah. And we were just like, it's just like these kind of like basic skills of learning, like, this is a professional environment. When you're like emailing someone, there's like a certain way to do it, and like it seems
spell check,
like make sure you're emailing the right person, like that you have like the right name of the publication, like that your attachments are attached. Like it seems really basic, but this is like this is stuff. These are mistakes that I see like every single day. Like even with like women or people who are writing for us or people who are pitching me like PR requests. It's like, my name is not Jennifer, and like I get called Jennifer like 6 times a week, like in email, and it's just like really, really basic stuff that I think if you master, like will actually help you out.
And to build on that, I know this makes me sound like the impossibly old person here, which like I am, right? But I am always stunned. Like when I worked for Maureen, like there was just no world in which I would have ever said no to anything, like ever, right? Like she needs me to work a weekend and like I have really fun plans, like I'm just canceling them. I'm not even telling her that I'm canceling them. I'm just canceling them and I'm like showing up, right? And like when I worked for her, she was on deadline, and she had a column, we were on deadline like Tuesday nights and Friday nights. And so Tuesday nights I would be there until 10 and Friday nights I would be there until midnight, which like sucked because I was like 23 to 28 and I spent my Friday nights like until midnight working, but there was like no task I would not do, whether it was fact checking or something as menial as like she needed me to make 1 million Xeroxes, right? So we could both read a book together. I would just do it. And I'm stunned at how many people come in, and I totally get it. That's not what you got a college degree for. That's not what you want to do. It's really frustrating. Like I didn't love it either. Maureen would probably be the first to tell you I could be just like very sullen and moody and temperamental, and I'm not advocating that. We had a discussion about that once, but I will say that like I see people, again, like young people who are given opportunities. It's like, oh, and they're never super exciting opportunities, right? It's like, hey, do you want to, like, none of our White House reporters can go, but do you want to drive up to Shanksville for the memorial? And it's in the pouring rain. And, like, you know, people be like, oh, like, I have a reservation tonight with my friend and I can't. And, like, I feel like the answer is just, like, always say yes. Like, always, always, always say yes, because those are the people, those are the young clerks who always get ahead. And, like, you never know when you're going to get a byline or something huge is going to happen. And this did not happen, but it just as easily could have. I always think of, oftentimes, young clerks will get sent on, like, Trump spends the weekend at Bedminster, and it just kind of sucks to be up at Bedminster, but we always staff it. So often they'll ask if no one can do it, like a young intern, if they want to go. And the Times will also put sort of like young news clerks on the plane on Air Force One. And again, I think of September 11th when George W. Bush, was one of those trips where you could have totally seen the White House team being like, gosh, I'm working on a big project and I'm on deadline, and someone has something with their kids, and, like, you know, is there a news clerk who, you know, it's going to be a nothing thing, he's just talking to a kindergarten class in Florida, but just go just in case. And so by always saying yes, you never know when you're going to be in a position to be on, like, a huge story, and, like, editors respect that. And if they know you will say yes and go do it, you're the one who gets the assignments and not the person who's like, ooh, but I'm taking a long weekend, it's Labor Day.
And it's really important. I mean, this starts now. When you do your college summer internships, this has happened. I hear this from people who run internships all over the country. That in the old days they'd do anything, and now there's just a lot of titration of, do I really have to do this? I hire some Penn students who work on my books and help me. I have to say that I've been extraordinarily lucky that I get the ones who sort of will go that extra distance, and every once in a while when I get one who won't, I'm surprised. But in reality, it's what you hear from employers, it's what you hear from your fellow academics if they're honest about the students who sometimes work with them, that there's a lot of, do I really have to do that? And here's the other thing. When you get this job, you still have to do that stuff. I mean, to be a good nonfiction writer, you have to do grunt work yourself. You know, so it's you have to learn the skill sets to do this. I mean, data reporting now, at least you can do some of it with computers, but that is the kind of work that no one ever knew how to do, and it's still hard. So I think that's excellent advice. Both of those points are excellent advice. Be professional. Make sure that what you show is professional. If you have clips, make sure they're good. Okay? Don't send your favorite clips if they don't start well. You know, think about what you're doing. You're sending somebody a handful of stories. Send them something that the beginning of it is interesting. Not that it was interesting to your friends, not that it was interesting to people at Penn, but that it would be interesting to people in the general world. And if you haven't written a lot of things at the beginning of them are not interesting to the general world, think about doing that. Because if you're a junior or a senior and you want to be at job interviews, you want to say, okay, here are the 4 things that I wrote. One could be a paper for class. One could be something you publish in the DP. But you're going to want to have that person read that, get into it, want to talk to you about it. Sometimes the stories you write that have bad leads are good things to talk about in interviews. Because the subject might be good, but the story might not be good. But think about that, because when you're doing things professionally, you're thinking about, when I'm in an interview, what am I going to talk about? You know, do I know the person that I'm interviewing? Do I know anything about them? If everything goes quiet, can I ask them about something they did? Did I at least Google them to check that out? And always spell their name right. I will tell you that every year for the Nora Prize, at least 2 or 3 of the applicants, sometimes the winners, spell my name wrong in the application letter. So it's right online. It's not that hard. Spell check can do it. Let's take a couple more questions. Do we have more in the back? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm a freshman, and I was wondering if you could touch on your process for obtaining, like, journalistic internships while you were, like, studying at Penn.
I can start because I got my first internship through Penn. There's a wonderful program here called the Real Arts at Penn Internship Program. Has anybody here done it in the audience? Yeah, it's amazing. It's run through the Writers House. They offer, I don't know how many you have now, but
800.
23. So there are 23 internships, and they give you a stipend to, like, live off of, and it's amazing. And I'm sure that people who work at the Writers House can tell you more about it. But when I was here, you apply and you write an essay, and I got an internship at Rolling Stone magazine for an entire summer where they, like, paid for me to do that, and it was amazing. And it was like, I made fantastic connections there where I am still friends with the people who I interned with. that internship actually set me up with like a freelance transcription job through like at Rolling Stone, like all year my senior year. So I cannot speak highly enough of the Real Arts program. If you don't know about it and you're interested in getting an internship, like look it up.
So my avenue for everything was through the Daily Pennsylvanian for getting all of my internships and everything since. I was in the first group of the DP has like, do you call them Neiman or Nyman? Nyman fellows or interns, where the Alumni Association pays for 2 or 3 students now to like get an internship at a professional. Does this not happen anymore? You guys are like 6 or I don't know. Lots.
Don't fact check the speakers.
Don't. Yeah. It was. I think there were 3 of us the first year, and so they had connections because they're professionals, and they arranged some way for us. They like paid me, and I got to go work at the New York Daily News, and the New York Daily News didn't have to pay me anything. So they're like, great. And then I just said yes to everything and worked really hard, and that was like, my first professional bylines. And from there, the connections through Penn and through the Daily Pennsylvanian, there are professionals out there from Penn and like every, journalism outlet you can think of, whether it's like Forbes or ProPublica or Politico. So you just need to try to meet them and work your sources and, apply for things.
Mine were all kind of happenstance and lucky. I applied for a million internships every summer, and it felt like each time I wasn't, like you mentioned, you said when you graduated you applied for some things and you got some and you didn't, like every time I just like barely got one. But each one turned out to be really great, and one is all you need. So I would just apply for a million. One year I randomly ended up at the New York Sun, which is now shuttered. But basically they had no real staff, and like a very sort of like neocon point of view. But it was actually fine because unless you were writing about like foreign policy where they would really edit your copy and you would like go back and you'd be like, but is our official style really calling it Red China? Right? Like, or like the illegal Palestinian territories. The rest of the stories were pretty straight, and they would just like send you out every single day, and you'd get to like write a day story, like run around Manhattan and write a day story, and they paid you, so it was awesome. It was like a journalism internship where I broke even. One summer I worked at the Gaithersburg Gazette because I'm from Maryland, so it was unpaid, but I was able to live at home to save money, and I worked at like the Cheesecake Factory at nights and weekends. That was my worst journalistic summer. It was just like a lot. And then one time Time Inc. had an internship program that like I applied for, and I was lucky enough to get, and that was another, I don't know if they still have it, but at the time
They don't have a magazine, do they? No, I'm just kidding.
But no, I think they now, it's like folded into the Meredith internship program.
But it was an amazing internship program. I got placed at Life magazine, which was like sort of like an insert into newspapers. It wasn't like one of my top choices, but it's an amazing internship because it's one of the rare journalism internships where you kind of break even. They put you up in the Columbia dorm, so they paid for housing, and they paid you, I forget, like a weekly or monthly stipend. And so again, it was really cool. I got to work in a magazine, and I broke even, but it was just random happenstance. There were no connections or anything.
Since you're a freshman, it's good for you to look at the whole area of this, because what's interesting is what's happened here at Penn. Of course, there are a number of paid internships. So people think that they're supposed to get paid $4,000 to work for the summer. Now, that's great if you get that. It less happens for freshmen than it does for upperclassmen. But there are internships that you should take for free if you can afford them too. So what I would suggest to you is keep in mind that there's a really robust program here now, but it's not everything. There's also the Bassini program here where you work with faculty members during the year on your books. I've had one Bassini fellow, but it's a great program where you work for a whole year or a whole semester and you get paid. But I guess what I'm saying is getting paid isn't the only part of this. And there are still places where you have to work not for pay, or you have to work with somebody for credit or something like that. And I think that while you're here at Penn, to think of the diversity of it, because there are a lot of programs that existed when these guys came out, even Jill, that don't exist anymore because the places don't, sometimes they view those fellows as babysitting jobs they don't want to have anymore. And the other part of it is that some of the staff is so young that they don't need to have so many interns there to be the young people, because you can now move ahead. The thing that's astonishing that all the people who run the Nora Prize are so amazed at And it happened like in the 2000s that you could have a senior editor job at a newspaper or a magazine when you were 26 if you were really good. That was simply impossible. You know, you just had to go longer. So all I would say is think about what you want to do. Think about the experiences you want to have. Think about the things that are paid. Look at things that not everybody else sees. If you're interested in different media, keep in mind that radio is different from TV, is different from magazine, is different from newspaper, is different from platforms that don't print. And I think about also which places you're going to be able to go to as a freshman or a sophomore, which places are more likely to be interested in you when you're a junior or senior. And keep in mind that now the time after your senior year is now still a paid internship time, because some of these fellowships, including the Nora Prize, can be used as a paid fellowship after you graduate. So, because a lot of places cannot afford to pay somebody for an entry-level job, they want you to be an intern, a sort of partly paid intern for the first 6 months or for the first year. So it's actually an entire 4-year cycle of possibilities during school, in the summer. And the key to it all, apply early and often. Look to things that exist, get your application in on time for anything that you think you're interested in. And if you're too young to get it 1 year, they'll be interested that you came back the next year.
But I would say I totally agree that if you have the luxury of taking an unpaid internship and it's a good opportunity that will grow your skill set, you should. But to be clear, like, that is a luxury and that is a real flaw in journalism, that not a lot of people can do that. And so on the one hand, I was incredibly lucky that in my family situation, I had to always break even, right? Like, at the very least I had to break even, but I was incredibly lucky to be able to break even and not have to earn a certain amount that summer to put towards my college tuition. So my pitch would be, like, if you're not in a position where you can accept an unpaid internship, like, there's a lot of paid ones, but it means you're gonna have to apply to more and cast a wider net, or do something like, and again, I don't know anyone's specific situation, but do something where I did, where you take something that might not be your dream internship, but you do it because you can live at home or live with a friend or live for free, and the hours are flexible enough that you can wait tables or have some other job on the side. So kind of think creatively, and it is possible to do all of this. And depending on your situation, whatever needs to be, make the amount of money you need to do, break even in my case, or, you know, if you're lucky, work unpaid.
Do another question right there.
Hi, thank you. Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering, so what is something that you wish you'd known about the magazine or the journalism industry that you did not know even as an intern or when you were in school, and that is perhaps something that you're not that fond of, even though you all love your jobs? Love to hear more about the, more competitive.
The dark side.
Yeah, the more competitive or, less exposed side of this industry. Thank you.
Oh, now they're all quiet. Anybody?
I mean, it's sort of unstable. Like, I'll say it. I work at one of the biggest magazine companies in the world, probably, and all of our competitors are experiencing layoffs. Like, no one is safe. I have never been laid off, but I think that is, like, an anomaly in this industry, especially working in, like, digital media, where a lot of where I was before, where a lot of a lot of outlets are funded by VC firms right now. Like, that money just isn't, you can't rely on it. So it's like to make it, like, servicey and kind of instructive, I think it's like something.
Put a good positive spin on it.
Positive spin on it. Like, something that I think about and a lot of my colleagues think about is, like, what is plan B? Like, not necessarily like what are we going to do if we leave the industry, but, like, okay, like, if this job isn't forever, like, what are my other skill sets? Like, where are other outlets that I really want to work for? Like, what does a freelance career look like with my skills? And, like, something that I've, been conscious of is, like, always trying to acquire new skills. Like, when I was at Entertainment Weekly, I learned how to produce videos and, like, produce podcasts also, and, like, sure, I'm not the best at it, but, like, if called upon, I could rise to the occasion to, like, put something together. And now that I work at a print magazine, like, I've accrued the skills of, like, how to do a layout, like, how to get photos approved, like, how to source photos for a print magazine. And I think it's just, like, being conscious of the fact that, like, you can't really be a one-trick pony anymore. Like, you need to have lots of skills and like understand that, you know, you're probably not going to work at the same place for like 20 years, whereas an editor who maybe started their career in the 80s like would.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, when my friends and I, who are journalists, like meet up to hang out, we're always talking about like this place that there were layoffs, or this place that there's restructuring or whatever, because this is happening and you need to be aware of it. And so it's challenging when you're going in, but I completely agree that you can get through that if you have a lot of skills and you're young, and you can have a lot of skills that a lot of the older people in the industry are maybe afraid of, or they don't fully understand. And you can come in and you know how people your age engage with news and engage with media, and you can use that to your advantage. So now in my new job, you know, part of the reason I took it is not only do I get to do the data and the investigative reporting, but I also do radio all the time, and I've never done radio before. And I go on TV, on local TV stations, and I've never done TV packages before. And so you can think about that too when you're applying to jobs. Are you going to be learning more skills? Are you going to be expanding your like portfolio of things that you bring to the table, which can only help you down the line in case, you know, they can give you an advantage for future opportunities, or if something doesn't work out, you know, it means that you can probably jump to something else sooner.
Yeah, I think your conception of like what a print journalist is, or what a television journalist is, or what a digital journalist is, like a journalist is all of those things, right? And it's just not enough to do one. Even those of us, like I think of myself as a print reporter, but like I have to be able to go on TV and talk about my stories. I have to be able to go on podcasts. I have to be able to write quickly for the web the way a wire service would. I have to be able to tweet. I have to be able to shoot video, all of that. And the second thing, which I guess I knew, but bears repeating, was that this is not the destabilizing point, but this is it's tough, right? So you have to really want it. And if you really want it, I think you can be successful. But I remember especially starting out and pitching when no one would take me seriously, like I would just have a list of like 10 or 15 publications that I would pitch a piece to, and I would start with one and I would like follow up, and when they rejected me, I would like go down to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one, right? So you shouldn't necessarily expect that like your first idea you send to GQ and they run it. You know, maybe it's some online publication you hadn't even heard of until recently, and they don't pay you, but you get a clip. And I'm not really good at like being, or I guess I am, but it's very counterintuitive. Like I hate bothering people. I also hate when people are mad at me, and someone is mad at me every single day, which I find confusing. But like journalism is one of those rare industries where like the thing where you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna be so annoying. I've called them like every single day this week, and I've emailed them. Like most good editors will say like, oh, these are actually the skills and persistence that I want in a journalist. So don't feel like you can't bother someone, because a smart editor will be like, if he or she is bothering me this much, imagine how relentless they are with sources. And so that can kind of help you get jobs.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry. I remember Matt Flegenheimer, who's another Nora winner, who is a reporter at the Times. He said this to another Nora winner, Danny Blum, who won last year, and she related to all of us, that he said, if you can imagine yourself doing anything else in the world, like, do it. Because, like, this job is really hard, and it can suck, and it's, like, it's, you know, it's not finance, but it is, like, so rewarding and special and like fulfilling, I think, to all of us for many different reasons. But like we are choosing to be in this industry because, or I can speak for myself, I am choosing to be in this industry because like I love the work I do. I think it's important, and like I literally can't imagine doing anything else.
And I would follow up on what Ashley was saying. I mean, I do think that your ability to deal with disappointment and deal with rejection is something that like they don't teach you at Penn. They teach you at Wharton a little bit more than we do it on the college side. But I think that a lot of people are stunned the first time that something really negative in their career happens, and sometimes they just never come back. And it can be like when I was in my 20s, I had a book contract and it got canceled. You know, and all my friends knew I had a book contract, and I took a leave to write a book, and the book crashed and burned, and I had to come back to Philadelphia Magazine and be a writer again, and like not talk about the fact that my first book, you know, just like never got published. And honestly, I think that happens. It happens with the biggest assignment you ever got. It happens with the job that you always wanted to have. And the difference at every age level, I mean, from the job you wanted, the DP, you know, to, you know, when you're doing this for a long time, is what do you do when you don't get it the first time or it's taken away from you? And I think that these guys are used to things being taken away a little bit more than we were, because we lived in a world where all newspapers had huge staffs, they were all unionized, and once you got a job in a newspaper, you're there for the rest of your life. And the big magazines, people were there for a really long time. But that isn't the case now. But here's the thing that I think always is true. A good story is always a good story. Writing a good story is still an amazing thing, and one good story can change the world. And that is still true. But the process, you only hear about the parts that are good. These guys won Pulitzer Prizes. They're not here to tell you about the stories that didn't work out the way they wanted to, or the jobs they didn't have. Maybe one year we'll do just an all disappointment panel. I actually once at the J School suggested that every professor should get up and describe his or her worst experience in journalism. Like losing my book contract was that for me. But I do think at every point it's important to experience failure. It's important to experience, even if you didn't fail, someone stops you even if you did the right thing. Because when you say you have to want to do it, you also have to want to push through the things about it that are challenging. They make you a better journalist. So we have food here, so you can continue to ask people on the panel questions. I want to thank these guys for coming from far and wide. And Ashley, are you really going to North Carolina? And Ashley has to go to North Carolina for a wedding this weekend, so pray for her.
Yeah, I know.
And and again, just keep in mind the mentorship network of the alums are here for you. We're here to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. Just be nice about it. The one thing that Elliot, who's my co-director of the Nora programs, is never tell people you want to pick their brain. This is a phrase that all people who mentor hate, and all young people think that that's a good thing to say. If you want to meet with somebody and talk to them about this field, have ideas to talk to them about, have things that you would want to do for them. If you want to read about what they do, read about it. If you want to talk to them, have a professional interaction with them about something that you would like to do for them that you could do for them. And that, there's no age at which you cannot have that conversation and walk out with something to do for them. Thank you very much for coming. Let's all have something to eat, and thank you to Writers House for putting this event on. You guys were fantastic.
I like the all disappointment panel.